Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Many of you who have been joining our program over the last dozen years or so have realized that what we try to really do is to help people find ways that they could improve their lives. After all, we start questioning ourselves by the time we're 50 or more, wondering whether or not the path that we've followed is something that really has heart. We question ourselves and get to a point where most people call a midlife crisis. What do we do next? Well, we take one step at a time and discover the ways that we can get to where we want to go. But certainly by this time in life, most of us have probably experienced what is known as an emotional trauma. Some have been probably small for some, while some have been great for others. The question is how we can overcome emotional trauma. Today, joining us on the program is a guest who's going to be sharing a 5,000-year-old Taoist Qigong system to recycle negative emotional states into positive energy, using things such as rapid eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, where you can address the emotional imbalances underlying depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even addiction. Also, we're going to be learning about the techniques of something known as Qigong. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest today, who has a counseling degree in psychology from the University of Calgary. He has been a practicing counselor for more than 20 years. He's also a certified Universal Healing Dao instructor who is certified in emotional processing, as I explained earlier. And he's going to be joining us as co-author of the book EMDR and Universal Healing Dao. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Doug Hilton. Doug, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Daniel. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's exciting when you bring something to light, especially a practice that's been as old as 5,000 plus years, and you realize with all this pop psychology that seems to be out there and everybody telling us what should work, it's guaranteed to be fast, these are real tried and true practices that you cover here in the book.
Right, yes. The Universal Healing Dao Qigong system is, as you said, so old and basically is teaching people how to heal themselves and find their own answers rather than have someone else impose their ideas on them. And so it can be really powerful, and a lot of people really love it.
Now, let's first of all talk about the EMDR, because I understand now the United States government, specifically the military, has now incorporated this into helping veterans to overcome post-traumatic stress disorder, or at least alleviate the burden that something like that can have.
Right. Yes, it's become more and more known over the past 30 years since it was kind of accidentally discovered by Dr. Francine Shapiro in the United States. She's a psychologist there. And she basically figured out how to tap into our natural emotional processing system and kickstart it when it gets stuck on really big things like that. So whether it's getting over being at war or being through some kind of natural disaster or going through a divorce or whatever, now this technique is being used far and wide to help people put away those feelings. And a lot of times it's completely gone and doesn't come back.
You know, as I was reading in your book, Doug, I was really fascinated about the way you talk about, for instance, we talk about healing the negative feelings of perhaps past trauma or even current trauma. But, you know, it's one thing to heal it and say, well, now that feels gone, but then it's another thing to think, well, can I step forward and not realize the same experience again? And I think many of us do that a lot of times because perhaps maybe we haven't cleaned it all out, or we haven't refueled ourselves with perhaps positive feelings about handling the same similar events in the future. Think about it. You know, it's kind of like that default in a computer. You know, perhaps we've been in a relationship and we felt that we were burned. And the next thing you know, we started a new relationship and perhaps we kind of recovered from that old one. But all of a sudden, little triggers begin to happen and our sensors go up and we think to ourselves, uh-oh, here it comes again. So you prepare yourself for what you feel will be inevitable trauma or pain. And then you realize you just kind of created a self-sabotage cycle. But this really helps take you out of that. Explain how that works.
Right. So in EMDR, and especially in the technique that Master Chia and I put together with Qigong, what we're trying to do is take that energy that's connected to that event and recycle it, turn it into something more positive. So in traditional EMDR, they had phases. They would do first the desensitization, like you said, get rid of the negative feelings. And then the next phase would be positive installation, which would be about building up the good feelings for the future so that if something similar did happen, you'd feel like you knew what to do about that and felt ready for it. Whereas in the new approach, we're kind of doing it all in one. And it's all just about taking that negative energy like coal and creating a diamond from it, recycling it, reprocessing it, and creating new positive energy from it so that we're not just doing some kind of an intellectual exercise, for example, where we think we've coped with it, but then, like you say, later on some event triggers it back up again, but we've actually taken the charge out of it completely.
I know one good example, perhaps you can kind of walk us through to give us an idea how all this works is, for instance, we're in very uncertain economic times. I mean, there are a lot of us that thought we were just riding high on the wave, and the next thing you know, everything comes crashing down, and you wonder how you're going to pay that electric bill or whatever it may be. And so you're out there and you're looking for work or trying to find a way to get back up on your feet, and you start, of course, running into disappointment. Now, how can something like this kind of really change the paradigm where, as we were saying, it's one thing to heal from the fact that perhaps you have had loss, but it's also another thing to be able to replace that with positive feelings where you get up each day thinking, you know, today's the day when something's going to happen and I just know it's going to work. Because usually when you have that kind of attitude, things actually do work.
Sure. For example, I have a lot of people that I see in my practice who were really affected by 2008 and everything just kind of dropping, right? And so we know that when we get affected in big ways like that and the economy is uncertain, it doesn't just affect us in terms of our thinking. It affects our emotions. It affects our beliefs about ourselves. It affects our bodies. We react on all levels. And so in traditional EMDR, they would have phases for each level and identify them specifically and target them to kind of process out whatever is connected to that. And then in the new practice that we've put together, we're working more with the internal organs because that's basically what Chinese medicine does, is focus on the internal organs and the energy channels that come from them. They call them meridians that sort of wiggle vertically through the body and try to process the energy out of each of those organs because the organs are viewed, and it's really showing to be true, that they're the source of all of those things, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health. So when we get the energy moving in the right way and get it processed through, then people can feel relief on all those levels, and they're not sabotaging themselves or feeling held back by themselves in some inexplicable way. A lot of people struggle with their beliefs. They might really know what they want, but deep down inside there's this little belief that says, gosh, I don't know if I really deserve it, though.
How often does that come up for a lot of us?
Right? Yeah. Or, gee, I don't know if I can handle it if it actually happens, something like that. So those levels all need to be dealt with. Otherwise, it's very frustrating for people to make some improvement, feel a bit of relief, but it's almost more frustrating to be closer to your goal but still can't touch it.
Yeah, that's certainly true for a lot of us, I think. Now, when it comes to feelings, you talk about in your book, EMDR and the Universal Healing Dao, is the fact that we also store emotions and emotional memories within our organs. Now, let's talk about that for a minute, and I'd like to kind of go through each one just to kind of give our listeners an idea of what we're talking about here, because I found this, I've seen this before, but it's something that I haven't brought up on the program, but I think that if listeners have a clear understanding, like, well, I didn't realize I stored that emotion in that organ, you know, and that's our first step. And then the second step, of course, is using techniques also such as Qigong, where we can begin to cycle that energy in there and help to heal and clean that out and actually build positive reserves. But let's go ahead and go through the idea of how we store emotional energy in the organs and what each of those organs and the emotional energy represents.
Sure. So each of the organs in the body is connected to different emotional states, according to Chinese medicine. And we focus a lot in the Qigong system on the solid organs, the heart, the spleen, the lungs, the kidneys, the sexual organs, and the liver. And those organs, when they're in balance, when the energy is warm and soft and moving properly without a lot of toxins in it, something like that, then there's certain emotions that come up that are positive. But when they're out of balance, there are others. And so, for example, with the heart is viewed to be the source of, when it's in balance, of joy, happiness, and love, like most people would say. Out of balance, though, it can be a source of impatience, hastiness, even hatred and cruelty. Now, when people go through events in their lives, they may not think, gee, I've been affected in my heart by this, because maybe it's not an obviously heart-connected issue like we would normally think. And a lot of people just think their emotions are coming from their head. But when we go into the practice and people actually focus on the heart and start to move the energy in there, then, oh, wow, all this emotion comes bubbling up that they didn't know was there. The spleen, out of balance, is connected to things like worry, negative thinking, and overthinking, whereas in balance, more about courage and righteousness. So the lungs, when they're out of balance, grief, sadness, loss, and depression. The kidneys, anxiety, stress, things like that. Fear. The sexual organs, not so much a specific emotional state, but more about just like a lack of vitality. And we know that's our best, fastest energy. That's the one that creates life. Think about the male sperm and the little tails wiggling in there, Powerful energy. So if that gets blocked, that's a big hindrance on how we feel generally in our lives, emotionally, physically, everything. And the liver, when it's out of balance, more about anger and frustration, jealousy, envy, things like that. So when we go through the entire circuit and go through all of the organs in the right way, then we're putting all those organs back on balance and bringing out the virtues of those organs. And together they all kind of combine. And we believe that they combine to form compassion. A lot of people feel warm inside when they're finished. They feel a little bit of energy rather than feeling drained. And they feel compassionate. They feel relaxed. So it's usually a very good experience by the time it's all over.
And to give you an idea, too, it's amazing when you encounter a person who has, let's say, done work like this, where they achieve that level, as you say, a state of calm, of loving kindness, compassion. And, and people say, who may not have experienced this, but, just think, for instance, has there ever been anybody that you've come across in your life that somehow, when they're in your presence, you just feel good? And a wonderful story that I like to share is one time when I was doing a broadcast, I had a guest in studio who happened to be the son of Trungpa Rinpoche, okay? And I was, delighted to have this person, as I had read and kept seeing his father's name pop up in various books throughout the ages that I was reading. And I remember him coming into the studio when I was receiving him in the lobby, and there was a tremendous sense of calm I could feel in the entire room. And the best way I could describe it is this could be a guy you could walk side by side with out on a battlefield where bombs are dropping, and you would feel like nothing was going to bother or touch you. And I thought to myself, wow, this is a guy that really put things like meditation and all these things into practice, and you could literally feel that sort of energy off of him. And, as I was talking, especially with my wife just yesterday about this, I said, she was mentioning how isn't it wonderful when you encounter these kind of people, it's almost like a light comes on and it just attracts people. And it gets to a point where even these people are willing to almost do anything you need them to do, in order to just enjoy being around that energy, in other words, being the light. And I like, there was this one, because you actually have photographs, if you will, in the book describing and showing how, for instance, Qigong and how you connect with energies and so forth. But in this one it says, in the Tao we believe that we cannot receive what we want and need until we work to refine our energy and use it to help others. Most of us seem to be chasing things that serve ourselves, and they think, well, how is that, how does all that work? In your experience, what have you seen?
Yeah, well, this notion of, I want, give to me, can be such a desperate kind of grasping, clasping kind of energy, that it's not all that positive. So in a way, from an energy perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense to think that that would attract some positive thing into your life. Some of us notice, too, that we're so busy racing in life, trying to get something that we really want, going so fast that even if something good came along, we may not even notice it. We're so intent on heading toward a goal that we're not really taking in all the aspects of the process, all the opportunities that are coming up along the way. I think about people that are dating, when they get desperate. I want to find that one person. And the right person might be right in front of their eyes, but they're not really seeing that because they're so focused on an ideal that's in their head. So when we create a positive, warm, receiving kind of an energy, then we're more likely to get it. And by giving is one of the easiest ways to do that. We feel good. We feel that sense of give and take with the universe, so to speak. We feel that that receptiveness inside of us. And so then we're more likely to receive. That's just, from an energy perspective, just makes sense.
Now, you talk about, as we were mentioning earlier, about tuning into the organs because that's where emotional energy can be stored. And as you described earlier, there are various energies depending on the organ that are stored there, and ways of being able to help change and clean all that out. And you have a wonderful photograph here, and you talk about how visualization leads to actualization. And the picture I'm looking at for the listeners is you see the lungs, and they have a smile on their face. The heart has a smile on its face. The liver, the kidneys, the intestines. And you think to yourself, that's awfully cute, but I wonder when you kind of, or if you visualize the idea of smiling into your organs, tell us what that produces, what that does for a person.
It's actually really powerful. The notion of smiling is central to the Universal Healing Dao system. It's something that people learn in the first practice, which is the one that we combine EMDR with, which is called the inner smile. And we know that when we laugh and smile, great chemical energy gets released in our bodies. But a lot of people just wait until something makes them smile. Well, if your life is really difficult, you could be waiting a long time.
Isn't that true?
So we wait, and then we sometimes suffer. But we can just smile, and people have some resistance to that because it feels fake, and they don't want to be genuine and all of that, and of course you should. But the thing is, if we get in an environment where we're smiling with other people, eventually, even if we're not really feeling like it, it starts to feel more genuine. And the same goes even if we're alone. If we just start to smile, not a great big grin, just like up with the corners of your mouth, up with the corners of your eyes, you start to feel that warmth, and the smile quickly becomes genuine. So then we're starting to release all those great chemicals. And then the really old Qigong phrase is, where the mind goes, the Qi follows. Qi is the energy. So when we focus into an organ and we smile to it, then we're bringing that great chemical change and the energy into that organ. And so it's actually doing something very powerful to help bring out, as I said, those virtues and transform the energy that's in that area from toxic into vital energy.
Now, you also give an exercise in there about smiling called the smiling meditation. Tell us about that, and maybe give a suggestion on how as people listen today, they might begin to start this practice, because to me this seemed to be a real powerful practice for starting the beginning of your day.
So the inner smile meditation is a foundation practice in the Universal Healing Dao Qigong system, and it's helping people to learn how to transform their emotions and tune into their bodies. A lot of us are not that body connected. And so when you say to people, how do you think you're doing in your spleen? No idea. Where do I have a spleen? Where is it? Sort of thing. So this practice is teaching people where your organs are and how to focus on them and how to check in with them and transform that energy and build up those virtues in the body. Later on in the practice, when you go through the book, then we add the eye movements to that, and that's where we get the new combined practice. But in the inner smile meditation itself, it's just smiling and then focusing. As I said, mind goes and leaves the energy. You focus in the middle of your forehead. I'm doing this quickly because we're having a conversation here. But
you're doing just fine.
Eventually, you would go to the heart and smile to the heart and see a red aura around the heart. And move down the left side further to the left under the ribs to the spleen and smile to the spleen. See a yellow aura around the spleen. Move up to the lungs. Focus on your lungs and see a white aura around them. Down to the kidneys. Bean-shaped or ear-shaped, Blue aura around them. Smile to your kidneys. Smiling to your sexual organs. Aura there. And lastly, moving up to the liver on the right side, great big triangle under the ribs, or around the ribs, around the liver, smiling to it. And that's the essence of the inner smile meditation. Of course, in real-time practice, you would focus longer on each organ, and probably notice that as you do focus longer, you get a better tune-in on each organ, and the color starts to become more vibrant and more clear. And the belief is that we're transforming the toxins when that happens. Often the organs look gray and cloudy at first and become very clear and vibrant over time. So it's great practice for the morning.
Mm-hmm. And I could see how that works too, for instance, in the movie What the Bleep. I know there are probably a lot of people that have had the opportunity to see this, and they talk about the experiments of Emoto Masuro, who I've had the opportunity to meet. And he talked about how on a glass of water, when you write things like love and then they flash freeze it, you see these beautiful crystals. And then when you put other things such as, for instance, I don't like you, hate, whatever the case is, you see just erratic. Yeah. And he showed how even words and emotional energy, and if it can transform water, just imagine when you're doing this exercise, you're talking about transforming the organs, that you're actually sending them that love, that energy of happiness, and how that can change. How does a person actually feel as they go through each one of these, or what has been your experience?
That can really vary from person to person. There's a huge range. If someone has lived a very toxic lifestyle, it might be a very uncomfortable thing. A lot of people, it sounds funny, but a lot of people have difficulty just smiling. That's their big challenge in that whole exercise is how do I keep myself smiling, which is quite a commentary on how some of us live, right, that we're not comfortable with smiling anymore. And some people will focus on an organ and immediately have a very strong emotional reaction. Some people cry, some people get really angry, depending on the organ and depending on how much it's been affected. We have what we call detox reactions with a lot of these practices, meaning that sometimes people will do the practices and they'll do whatever expelling kind of thing that they happen to do to get the toxins out, which could be anything from blowing their nose to crying to passing gas, burping, sweating, all kinds of things. Some people end up feeling a little bit headachy at first, but with a little bit of perseverance, then eventually a lot of that fades and it just becomes a nice, pleasurable experience as they go through the organs.
The other thing, too, is that you share about the sound of the organs. Tell us about that and why that's important as well.
Mm-hmm. So another of the foundational practices in the Universal Healing Dao Qigong system is the 6 healing sounds. And those, again, another ancient practice. And this was designed to help cool off the organs and detoxify them. And we have combined that in the final practice because it helps to keep the stress level down for people. One of the concerns, of course, when you're dealing with, say, really big traumas, would be that the person might be doing the right things but might get really overwhelmed in the process, big emotions coming up, things like that. And we want to have a way to keep it manageable for people. So we can use each of the 6 healing sounds to help people cool off the organs as they go and make sure that they're not just having a whole bunch of heat and friction building up in their body and then rising up into their head and creating a lot of discomfort. So, for example, we have a sound called the lung sound. They're all very simple. The lung sound is just like imitating a snake. You go with your teeth together, an S, long S sound. And even though that's very simple sound, you notice if you make it that you're breathing out and kind of holding back at the same time. And that creates just enough counter pressure on those tiny little channels in the body, the organ meridians, to flush them out and cool them off and let the toxins release.
Now, you also show, and these are really fascinating pictures because you really connect the body and the system to, I guess, planets, or at least into the universe or galaxy, solar system, whatever you want to call it there. How did they come about bringing that into play? How does that work actually?
Again, Chinese medicine views the internal organs as being sort of the source of everything. And when we look at the organs, we're also looking at them as being connected to a variety of dimensions of life: color, sound, direction, seasons, time of day, and the planets. And it has to do with the kind of energy that comes off those planets and how they affect each parts of our body. For example, it won't be a big surprise to a lot of women to know that the moon can affect us depending on how close it is to the Earth, right, with the tides and things like that. And people can be affected by those kinds of things. Well, planets, depending on their composition, also affect the organs, and so they're more connected to some than others. Mars is a very hot planet, like the heart, right? So it's like that. So we're connecting them in those ways. So we know that when we do this practice, we're reaching out far beyond, at least in theory, far beyond just the emotions in the body, but reconnecting with everything around us. And that's, I think, what all people are looking for, especially as we get into our 50s and 60s and things. We're trying to feel at peace with life. Like, we've done all the racing and all that sort of thing and paid our dues, and now it's time to feel like, okay, these are the golden years. But how are they going to be the golden years if you don't really feel like you're connected inside your own body, at peace inside, and feel like you're a part of things? So that's a cosmological kind of way that we do it as well.
Now, most importantly for our listeners out there, as you pick up this book, we seem to be in a world where we want to, when we discover, for instance, something that we hear works, that actually improves a person's life, and maybe in some cases very dramatically, we tend to think that, well, geez, if I do that and that works that well from where I'm at, then I need to do a lot more of it. And anybody who's decided to take supplements, for instance, to help feel physically a lot better, realize, well, when you do that, you can actually hurt yourself because, you're overloading your body with toxicity. And you talk about the very same thing here in these people implementing these practices. Don't overdo it. Be gentle with the process, things like that. Tell us why that's important.
Yes. The word that comes up all the time in the Qigong system, and in many others, of course, is balance. We're talking about not too much, not too little. And that varies from person to person and from day to day and things like that. And part of creating health is being aware of that and then working with it rather than trying to impose something else onto it that we think should be the way that we live. And so sometimes people, when they have something really painful inside of them and they're aware of it, of course they're anxious to deal with it. I get people that call me all the time. I also do hypnosis, and they'll say, I've got this feeling, and I know where it comes from. It's right there in my gut. I just want you to hypnotize me and rip it out. And I think, I don't want to go anywhere near that, because that's not the kind of thing we want to do. This is a healing process. It's not a rip and tear kind of a deal. If we just rip it out, and there's a good chance the person will become so overwhelmed by that process, the sudden change, that it could be traumatizing in a whole new way. And so we want to kind of move at things at a measurable pace. Sometimes people have unexpected reactions when they do this kind of practice because it's different, right? We're moving the eyes, and somehow that's connected to emotional release and thoughts coming up and things like that. It can be very surprising for people. And so it's important to allow them to just slow down, digest what you've done, make sure you're okay, and then carry on, rather than sort of burrow through something and then later kind of wonder if you did it too quickly or did it wrong or weren't ready for what was coming next.
Yeah, certainly change is one thing, but it's another thing to realize that you've been so used to particular ways you've been doing things. Are you really ready for that big change? And unanimously, I think a lot of us would say, no, I don't think I am. So be careful what you ask for and be careful about the process and do it, as you said, one step at a time, be patient and be diligent, most importantly, and you'll realize that the change will actually come quicker than if you tried imposing it all, and you'll actually be able to adapt a lot easier, it sounds like.
That's right. That's right. And it's also not so exhausting then. Sometimes people just want to treat it like a no pain, no gain process. I'll just keep going. I'm exhausted. I'll keep going because it's good for me. Maybe not. Maybe it's better to take a rest and come back when you've got some energy, because we are working with energy in this, and you're going to need enough to be able to get through it.
The book is EMDR and the Universal Healing Dao. Our guest today, Doug Hilton, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Doug, first of all, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program to introduce this work to our listeners here. Is there a website people can find out more about this work and how to go about getting the book, things like that?
Well, sure. They can go to my website, which is www.fullcirclehealing.ca, or they can find the book all kinds of places. If they just Google the title, they'll find it, but they can find it through the publisher, Inner Traditions, or through barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, powells.com, indiebound.org. If you have Canadian listeners, they can find it in chapters in some stores. They can find it in the I can't think of the other one. But anyway, it's all over the place, really. It's in iBooks. It's on iTunes.
So it's pretty much available. There's no excuse.
Nope, I don't think so.
All right. Well, Doug, I want to thank you again for being on the program today and sharing this wonderful work with our listeners. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate being on.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more. Visit us at beyond50radio.com and find out how you can take those steps necessary to help improve your lives. You can also discover what's coming up on our programs as well as what's going on in the Beyond 50 community. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.